This is the 27th episode of the Effective Executive podcast and video for the Effective Executive YouTube channel. And in this episode, I want to talk about centralization versus decentralization. I'm going to kind of start big picture and then work down to the organization. And economically, you have two. Well, there's more than two, but we'll just use the two primary ones talked about in the U.S. Are Austrian economics versus Keynesian economics. And even as an executive, I think it's important to know what's at work around you, especially in Europe where things are more socialized and centralized. And you go to countries like China and Russia, where it gets even more centralized. South America, a lot of centralization around things. So Austrian or Keynesians are kind of like, we want to control things, and you can control it through the Federal Reserve. Now, whether that's good or bad, I'm not here to debate that right now. But in general, I don't find control to be the right thing to do, even in organizations. But that's the Keynesian mindset. So that's why you have the Federal Reserve. You got to have smart people out there. It's all that kind of mindset associated with it. And then there's the Austrian side, which is just kind of letting the markets take care of free thinking, take care of the economics that are going on in a particular country. And you have certainly a lot more Keynesians. Now, when I was in school, I was only taught about Keynesian in the Chicago school, which is Milton Friedman. Not quite as extreme as Keynes, but it still believes that there needs to be some control in there. So this is kind of the different thinking that's going on. And some current events that really caught my eye are these power grid problems. And all of the central planning. Let's start with California first, and then we can move to Texas. I don't know as much about the Texas piece, but California, a lot of centralized planning around, how much heat they're going to need. What they can't plan on is how much sunshine is going to be for the solar panels and how much wind they're going to be able to get from the windmills and generating energy from there. And so what you get in central planning is you kind of get this, you get shortages, you get unintended consequences. And I'm not saying there aren't unintended consequences with, decentralization, but I found, especially in organizations, they're not as severe as what you get when you have centralized planning. And there's a lot of different reasons associated with that we'll talk about. Now, another scenario, mask wearing, right? So however you feel about masks, again, this isn't a political channel, podcast or YouTube channel. So, but we look at what's happened in New York and California, very draconian types of measures, very centralized. Government's going to tell you what to do, what's right and wrong. And then you look at places like Florida, where it's a lot of the personal decision that you have in association with taking care of yourself. And I always find the latter to be best for organizations, this decentralization. But you got to have a purpose associated that your employees and your workers understand so that they can be successful in that environment, understand they have the responsibility to do that. Now, these are two very different types of ways of managing things. And when we look at organizations and you look at the two primary things, I think control or are involved with how an organization performs are motivation and control. So with regards to motivation, you have the theory X, the authoritarian. We talked about Frederick Taylor before in this podcast episode, versus kind of the participative environment that Deming and others promoted for management, the theory why, if you will, Douglas McGregor. So, you know, motivation wise, you're gonna take two different ways of approaching that in this centralization decentralization environment. Now, most organizations, again, this is my observation. You may have a different view. Is that most organizations are centralized. There's a lot of management controlling things, or ancillary areas like IT, the specialists, very tayloristic, very controlling type of thinking that management needs to be the one, or the specialists need to be the one making all the decisions. I just have never found that to be the best way to go. And I encourage organizations, obviously, what my whole method is about is moving organization from centralization to decentralization. Now, I worked in Europe and Australia and Asia and different South America, different places where centralization is very important. I mean, it's the way they run their governments, right? You got to be centralized, you got to be socialist, you got to be communist. We tell you what to do, centralized planning, those types of things. And the formerly richest country in the world, or a richest country in the world, the U.S., especially early on, was very decentralized in association with how they operated. Now, this didn't happen until really Deming and others came along, but they were certainly less centralized than some of the things you would have going on in Europe at the time. So this gets into controlling things and telling people what to do versus working from purpose. So telling people what to do, very centralized. We're going to write scripts. We're going to have policies. We're going to have rules. We're going to discipline people. It's all those types of things. Versus working from a purpose, and understanding what that purpose is in the organization, and workers making their own decisions about their own work. Two very different types of thoughts. People talk in terms of a spectrum sometimes, but to me, I find it's really one or the other. They tend to polarize in organizations, and when you work from purpose, when your workers work from purpose, and they have the responsibility, and they're have a decentralized organization, you're going to find that for the same reason that you get mask wearers in Florida, they do it to protect themselves because they know what the risks are, as opposed to the government coming in and telling them to wear a mask or stay in, or shut down restaurants, or whatever the subject is. So, but you have to be able to work from purpose by knowing what the purpose is, right? And again, I don't believe, I find that centralized organizations are very, working to tell you what to do. They're very concerned about doing things right, which makes you efficient, but it doesn't make you effective. You get your purpose from studying your own organization from a synthetic standpoint. So I even think in terms of centralization as being very analytical thinkers versus decentralization, which is doing things right, or doing right things as opposed to doing things right. And doing right things means that you need to understand from a synthetic standpoint what's important to customers, and gathering all that, because once you understand what's important to customers, you understand your purpose much better, and you're looking at the whole rather than just the pieces. So this is what I want to talk about this week. Go to the effective playlist, the 95method.com effective playlist, and you'll find the difference between efficient and effective, but you can almost think in terms of centralized versus decentralized too, because when you have people capable of making good decisions, no matter where they are in the organization, but especially on the front line, and they're making their own decisions, you're going to find that working from purpose rather than telling them what to do is far more effective, and it's less expensive for a lot of reasons because you're working from trust. Now, if somebody violates that trust, that doesn't mean you just ignore it, because if they didn't understand the purpose, that's one thing. If they purposely did something wrong, then it's time to part ways, I would guess. So as opposed to telling people what to do all the time, because they're always going to be waiting for you to tell them what to do next. If I work from purpose, I know what to do. I know what my next action needs to be. So that's it for this week. Centralization versus decentralization. My methods are all focused on decentralizing your organization. It's done in a way that doesn't blow up the whole organization, because people freak out when they think they're losing control. If you're moving from centralized to decentralized, they don't like it, especially at the beginning, because they like their world that they had. And so executives, it's a challenge associated with it, that there is a better way to go about running their organization.